Illicit fortunes often wash cleaner than inherited wealth, a harsh truth Celine hadn't grasped 5 years ago. Back then, walking away from a dying man in a Brooklyn alley to marry a billionaire heir felt like a pragmatic choice for survival. Today, her husband's empire is crumbling, suffocated by millions in shadow debt. Their only salvation is a ruthless anonymous buyer stepping into the boardroom to bail them out. When the heavy oak doors finally swing open, Celine realizes her past hasn't just caught up with her. It's here to collect. Rain lashed against the single cracked window of the Williamsburg apartment, the rhythmic drumming masking the sound of Celine zipping up her leather duffel bag. The room smelled of damp brick, cheap coffee, and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was a smell she had grown accustomed to over the last 3 years, but tonight it made her stomach turn. Nicholas sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, a towel pressed against his ribs. His knuckles were bruised, the skin split over the joints from whatever underground debt collection he had been ordered to execute that evening for the Corelli syndicate. He didn't say a word as she moved around the tiny, dimly lit room, packing the last of her clothes. He just watched her, his dark, heavy-lidded eyes tracking her every move with a terrifying stillness. "You're making a mistake, Celine," he finally said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, barely carrying over the sound of the storm outside. Celine stopped her hand, lingering on the brass zipper of her bag. She forced herself to breathe to harden the shell around her heart. "A mistake is staying here, Dom. A mistake is waiting for the night the cops knock on this door to tell me you're in a morgue because you didn't duck fast enough." "I told you, I have a plan," Nicholas replied, his grip tightening on the bloody towel. "Lorenzo is stepping back. The territory is opening up. Give me 2 years, Celine. 2 years, and I'll have the docks. I'll have enough clean fronts to buy you the skyline you're always staring at." Celine turned to face him, the dim yellow light from the street lamp outside, casting harsh shadows across her face. She was breathtakingly beautiful, even with her hair damp and her face devoid of makeup. But her eyes were cold, calculating. She had spent her entire childhood in trailer parks and eviction notices. She was currently working 70-hour weeks at a high-end Manhattan lounge just to pay for her finance degree. She was exhausted down to her marrow. 2 years, Celine let out a hollow laugh. "You've been saying 2 years since we met. I'm 24, Dom. I'm tired of counting pennies for groceries. I'm tired of washing blood out of your shirts in a bathtub that doesn't even drain properly. Preston asked me to marry him tonight." The name hung in the air like a dropped grenade. Preston Kensington III. He was a regular VIP at the lounge where Celine worked the heir to Kensington Global, a sprawling behemoth of luxury real estate, international shipping, and boutique hotels. He wore bespoke Brioni suits, drove a customized Mercedes Maybach, and treated $100 bills like loose change. Nicholas's jaw locked. The muscles in his neck pulled taut. The trust fund kid. The one who buys his courage with daddy's plastic. The one who can give me safety. Celine fired back, her voice rising. "He's offering me a life, Nicholas. A real life. A seat on the board after we're married. A home where I don't have to check the deadbolts 3 times. I love you, I do. But love doesn't pay the rent, and it certainly won't stop a bullet." Nicholas slowly stood up, wincing slightly as his bruised ribs protested. He crossed the small distance between them. Even injured, he radiated a dangerous, feral energy that made the room feel suffocatingly small. He towered over her, his dark eyes stripping away her defensive bravado. "Safety is an illusion. Celine," he murmured, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Men like him, they don't know how to protect what they have, because they never had to bleed to earn it." When the wolves come, he'll throw you to them to save himself." "And you're the wolf," she challenged, though her voice trembled slightly. Nicholas reached out his thumb, gently tracing the line of her jaw. The contrast between his bruised, violent hands and the terrifying tenderness of his touch almost broke her resolve. "No," he said softly. "I'm the monster the wolves are afraid of. If you walk out that door, don't look back. Because when I finally take this city, I'm taking everything in it. And you won't be on my side of the table." Celine swallowed hard, forcing away the tears threatening to spill. She stepped back, breaking the contact. "Goodbye, Nicholas." She grabbed her bag and walked out into the pouring rain. Down on the street, Preston's black Maybach was idling by the curb, a beacon of dry, heated luxury. As she slid into the plush leather seats, she looked up at the fourth-floor window. Nicholas was standing there, a shadow against the glass, watching her leave. She told herself it was the right choice. She told herself that a ruthless, calculated mind like hers belonged in the corporate world, not the underworld. She didn't realize that in 5 years the two worlds would become indistinguishable. The Baccarat Hotel's Grand Salon was a symphony of crystal chandeliers and whispered billion-dollar deals. But to Celine Kensington, it felt like an interrogation room. 5 years had transformed her. The cheap leather jacket and denim were gone, replaced by a tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent. Her hair was styled into an immaculate razor-sharp bob, and a blinding 5-carat diamond weighed down her left hand. To the outside world, she was the untouchable queen of New York high society, the brilliant financial mind behind her husband's empire. In reality, she was the chief engineer of a sinking ship, desperately trying to bail out water, while her captain deliberately drilled holes in the hull. Preston sat across from her at the velvet booth, his hands shaking slightly, as he brought a crystal tumbler of scotch to his lips. It was 11:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. He looked awful. The boyish, aristocratic charm that had seduced Celine 5 years ago had completely dissolved, eroded by an avalanche of cocaine gambling addictions and a terrifying blend of arrogance and stupidity. "It's not as bad as the auditors are making it seem, Celine," Preston stammered, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "It's a temporary liquidity issue. The Macau project will bounce back." Celine stared at him, her expression a mask of absolute ice. She slid a thick manila folder across the table. "Stop lying to me, Preston," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I spent the last 48 hours tracing the mezzanine financing you secured for the Macau casino. You didn't go to Goldman. You didn't go to Chase. You went through a shadow holding company based in the Cayman Islands, a company that charges 22% interest and demands physical collateral." Preston's eyes darted around the room, terrified someone might overhear. "I had to the board was going to vote me out if the casino stalled again. It's just private equity, Celine. It's aggressive, but it's legal." "It's not private equity, you idiot," Celine hissed, leaning in. "I ran the shell companies. 8 layers deep, it all funnels back to a syndicate front out of Palermo. You borrowed $300 million from the Camorra, Preston, and you defaulted on the payment 2 weeks ago." Preston's face drained of color, turning the shade of spoiled milk. The crystal tumbler trembled violently in his hand before he set it down. How did you find that?" "Because I actually do the job you were handed," Celine replied brutally. She rubbed her temples, a severe migraine threatening to split her skull. For 5 years, she had endured his mistresses, his public embarrassments, his temper tantrums. She had built a fortress around Kensington Global, using every brilliant financial maneuver she knew to keep the stock price stable. but she couldn't outmaneuver the Mafia. "They sent a proxy," Preston whispered, his voice cracking. "A buyout firm. Obsidian Capital. They bought up our debt notes from the other banks, too. They hold all the leverage, Celine. Everything. If we don't sign over 51% of Kensington Global to them by tomorrow at noon, they're going to initiate a hostile takeover. They'll liquidate the assets, seize the Hamptons estate, and—" He choked on his words. "And they told me they'd break my legs before throwing me off the Kensington Tower." Celine felt the floor drop out from beneath her. 51%. That meant giving up complete executive control. The family legacy, the empire she had bled for, gone in a single signature. Who is the head of Obsidian Capital? Celine demanded, her mind already racing through legal loopholes, bankruptcy protections, anything to stave off the executioner. "I don't know," Preston whimpered. "Some Italian guy, Di Russo. He operates out of the shadows. He bought out 3 other rival syndicates in the last few years and legitimized their money through real estate. He's a monster, Celine. A ghost. But his lawyers are real, and they are coming to the boardroom tomorrow." Celine froze. The air in her lungs suddenly felt like shattered glass. Russo. Nicholas's last name was Russo. No, she told herself quickly, her logical brain stepping in to crush the rising panic. It's a common name. Nicholas was a street enforcer. A talented one, a terrifying one, but he was nickel and diming in Brooklyn. You don't go from breaking kneecaps for thousands to orchestrating $500 million corporate takeovers in 5 years. The math doesn't work. "We fight it," Celine said firmly, pushing the terror down. "We file for Chapter 11 tomorrow morning before they arrive. It freezes the debt collection. It buys us time to restructure." "We can't," Preston sobbed, putting his head in his hands. "If we file for bankruptcy, the SEC will investigate our ledgers, and when they look at the offshore accounts, I used to hide my gambling debts. Celine, I'll go to federal prison for 20 years. You have to save me. You're the smart one. Talk to this Russo guy. Negotiate with him. You can charm anyone." Celine looked at her husband, this pathetic broken man she had traded her soul for. Nicholas had been right. When the wolves came, Preston was hiding behind her skirt. "I'll handle the meeting tomorrow," Celine said coldly, standing up and buttoning her suit jacket. "But if we survive this, Preston, I want a divorce, and I'm taking half of whatever is left." She didn't wait for his answer. As she walked out of the Baccarat Hotel, the sky over Manhattan was an ugly, bruising grey. The storm was coming, and for the first time in 5 years, Celine felt completely defenseless. The boardroom of Kensington Tower was perched on the 80th floor, offering a sweeping, godlike view of the New York financial district. The walls were paneled in rare mahogany, the chairs upholstered in imported Italian leather. It was a room designed to intimidate, built to remind anyone who entered that the Kensington family owned the sky. Today, it felt like a mausoleum. Celine sat at the right hand of the head chair, her laptop open, her eyes locked on the heavy double doors. Beside her, Preston was sweating profusely, his knee bouncing in a rapid neurotic rhythm. The rest of the board, 7 older, fiercely conservative men, murmured nervously amongst themselves. Harrison, the oldest board member, leaned over to Celine. "Is it true, Celine?" Harrison whispered. Preston leveraged the company's pension fund. "We are addressing all financial liabilities today." "Harrison," Celine replied with practiced corporate stoicism, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. At exactly 1200 p.m., the heavy oak doors unlatched with a loud final click. The room fell dead silent. 3 men walked in. The first 2 were massive, built like linebackers, but dressed in immaculate, custom-tailored charcoal suits. Their eyes were cold, sweeping the room with the practiced efficiency of apex predators checking for threats. They took up positions by the door, blocking the exit. Then the third man walked in. Celine forgot how to breathe. Her vision narrowed, the edges of the room turning white. It was Nicholas. But it wasn't the Nicholas she had left in Williamsburg. The street grit was gone, replaced by an aura of terrifying, polished supremacy. He wore a midnight blue bespoke suit that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, a platinum Patek Philippe Nautilus gleaming quietly on his wrist. His dark hair was styled immaculately, but the faint, thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow remained a brutal reminder of where he came from. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, absolute confidence radiating from every step. He didn't just walk into the room. He owned it the second his Italian leather shoes touched the carpet. Preston, oblivious to his wife's paralysis, stood up on trembling legs. Mr. Russo, I am Preston Kensington. Sit down, Preston, Nicholas said. The voice was the same, deep, gravelly, vibrating with an undercurrent of violence. It hit Celine like a physical blow. Preston immediately collapsed back into his chair, his mouth snapping shut. Nicholas didn't even look at Celine. He walked to the opposite end of the 50-foot table, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and sat down. He steepled his fingers, letting the silence stretch until the tension in the room was unbearable. Let's skip the corporate theater. Nicholas began, his dark eyes locking onto Preston. Obsidian Capital currently holds $420 million of your debt. You have defaulted. The terms of that mezzanine loan dictate that upon default, my firm has the right to seize all collateral, which includes 51% of Kensington Global's voting shares, the residential properties in Manhattan and the Hamptons, and absolute executive control. That's a hostile takeover, Harrison blustered, slamming his fist on the table. You're acting like a corporate raider. We'll tie you up in litigation for a decade. Nicholas shifted his gaze to Harrison. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrison Vance, you own a lovely summer home in Martha's Vineyard. Do you know who holds the mortgage on that home? I do. You also have a son, a junior partner at a law firm who has a terrible habit of insider trading based on your dinner table conversations. The SEC would love the dossier my people have compiled on him. Harrison turned ghost white and sank back into his chair, utterly neutralized. Nicholas looked back at Preston. I didn't come here to negotiate, Preston. I came here for an execution. Your grandfather built this company. Your father expanded it, and you bled it dry to pay for cocaine baccarat tables in Macau and terrible real estate investments. Preston was shaking openly now. What do you want? Take the company. Take it, just don't hurt me. I am taking the company, Nicholas stated softly. But there's a condition. Finally, for the first time since he entered the room, Nicholas's eyes slid over to Celine. The impact of his gaze felt like touching a live wire. The utter deadness she had seen in his eyes 5 years ago was gone. In its place was a burning, triumphant fire. He had promised her he would take the city. He had kept his word. The Kensington name holds value in the public sector. Nicholas continued, his voice silky, dangerous. A total hostile takeover by a shadow firm will tank the stock before I can liquidate the dead weight. Therefore, the transition will be presented to the public as a strategic merger. Preston, you will step down as CEO, citing health reasons. You will surrender all your shares, and you will walk away with absolutely nothing. Nothing, Preston gasped. I'll be bankrupt. You're already bankrupt. Nicholas smiled, a cruel, sharp expression. The alternative is I hand the evidence of your embezzlement over to the feds, and my associates from Palermo, pay you a visit regarding the insult you showed them by defaulting." Preston swallowed a sob, nodding frantically. Okay, I'll step down." "And the second condition," Nicholas said, leaning forward, never breaking eye contact with Celine. "The board needs a familiar face to keep the shareholders calm. A liaison between Kensington Global and Obsidian Capital. Someone who knows the books, inside and out." Celine finally found her voice. It was trembling, but she forced the steel back into her spine. "You want me to stay?" "I require you to stay, Mrs. Kensington," Nicholas said, pronouncing her married name like a slur. "You will be appointed acting CEO. You will report directly and exclusively to me. You will work from my offices. You will fix the mess your husband made. If you attempt to resign, if you attempt to leave the city, or if you refuse this offer, I will burn Preston to the ground, and I will dismantle this company piece by piece until thousands of your employees are on the street." Celine felt the trap snapping shut around her ankle. He wasn't just taking the company. He was taking her. He was reversing their roles. 5 years ago, she held the power to walk away. Today, he was making sure she couldn't take a single breath without his permission. "This is coercion," Celine said, her voice a fierce whisper. "This is business," Nicholas replied smoothly. He signaled to one of the massive men by the door, who stepped forward and placed a thick, leather-bound contract in front of Celine, sliding a Montblanc pen beside it. "You wanted the top of the skyline, Celine," Nicholas said, his voice dropping so only she and Preston could hear the venom in it. "Sign the paper and it's yours. But this time you work for me." Walking into Obsidian Capital felt like stepping into an immaculate high-altitude void. There were no warm oak panels or oil paintings of founders here. The aesthetic was ruthlessly modern, black marble floors, frosted glass partitions, and a terrifying silence that seemed to swallow the chaotic noise of Manhattan below. The employees moved with predatory efficiency. There were no water-cooler conversations. Everyone wore bespoke suits, and almost half of the senior staff walked with the faint, rigid posture of men hiding concealed firearms beneath their tailored jackets. Celine's new office was a glass box, adjacent to Nicholas's sprawling corner suite. She had been given absolute access to Obsidian's legitimate financial ledgers, and what she found over the next 48 hours terrified her far more than the gun-toting security guards at the elevators. Nicholas hadn't just clawed his way up the mob hierarchy. He had fundamentally corporatized it. Sitting at her polished concrete desk, Celine stared at the cascading data on her dual monitors. She traced the money flowing through a labyrinth of offshore shell corporations, utilizing legal loopholes set up by elite law firms like Skadden Arps and Wachtell Lipton. Nicholas had systematically bought out the crumbling remnants of the old New York families, the Lucchese and Colombo factions, not with bullets, but with hostile buyouts of their legitimate fronts. He had weaponized private equity, turning blood money into massive, unassailable real estate portfolios in Tribeca Hudson Yards and Mayfair, London. He was a billionaire, completely off the Forbes grid, operating with impunity. "You're looking for a weakness." A deep voice resonated from the open doorway. Celine jumped instinctively, closing a spreadsheet. Nicholas stood leaning against the doorframe, sipping espresso from a stark white cup. He wore a charcoal grey suit with no tie. The top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt undone, revealing a faint glimpse of a dark, intricate tattoo she remembered tracing with her fingertips in a lifetime that felt light years away. "I'm assessing the corporate structure," Celine replied smoothly, keeping her voice detached and professional. "If I am going to act as your CEO, I need to know where the landmines are." "There are no landmines." "Celine," Nicholas said, walking slowly into her office. He set the espresso cup on her desk and leaned over, planting his large hands flat on the concrete surface, caging her in. He smelled of bergamot, expensive leather, and something dangerous and masculine that made her pulse spike. I spent 5 years ensuring that by the time I came for you, I was bulletproof. Celine met his gaze, refusing to shrink back in her leather chair. You didn't come for me. You came for Kensington Global. I'm just the collateral damage. A convenient trophy to humiliate Preston. A dark, dangerous smile played on Nicholas's lips. It didn't reach his eyes. Preston is a parasite. Destroying him was just paperwork. Do you honestly think I spent half a decade orchestrating a hostile takeover of a dying hotel and shipping conglomerate for the profit margins? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, gravelly whisper. I bought this company because it was the cage he kept you in, and I wanted to be the one to rip the door off its hinges. Before Celine could formulate a response to that terrifying confession, her private cell phone buzzed violently on the desk. The caller ID flashed Preston. Nicholas's eyes flicked to the screen. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. He didn't say a word, but he gave a subtle nod. Answer it. Celine swallowed hard and picked up the phone, putting it on speaker. Preston. Celine thanked God. Preston's voice was frantic, breathless, and slurred. He sounded completely unhinged. You have to wire me money. I need 200,000 right now. Just funnel it from the discretionary account. He froze my personal card, Celine. My black Amex is declining. Celine closed her eyes, a wave of profound disgust washing over her. Preston, you surrendered your shares. You stepped down. I don't have access to the discretionary accounts to fund your habits anymore. Everything goes through Obsidian's compliance division. You don't understand, Preston shrieked, the sound of traffic and honking horns blaring in the background. I owe people, Celine. Not the Italians, other people. The poker room down in the meat-packing district. If I don't have the cash by tonight, they are going to break my jaw. Just tell Russo it's a severance package. You're sleeping with him anyway, aren't you? That's why he kept you. Celine's breath hitched. A hot spike of fury pierced her chest, but before she could speak, Nicholas reached down and tapped the screen, cutting the call. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Celine stared at the black screen of her phone, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a profound, agonizing humiliation. She had traded her youth, her brilliant mind, and her heart for a man who viewed her as an ATM. Nicholas straightened up. The predatory smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that made him look like the Grim Reaper in a bespoke suit. He pulled a sleek, encrypted phone from his inside pocket and dialed a single digit. Matteo D'Atiosias. Nicholas said, his voice flat, devoid of any human emotion. Preston Kensington is wandering the meatpacking district. He owes money to the underground room on Gansevoort Street. Go pick him up. Celine stood up quickly, panic finally breaking through her icy facade. Nicholas, no, don't hurt him. He's pathetic, but he's not worth a murder charge. Please. Nicholas looked at her, his dark eyes softening just a fraction. I'm not going to kill him, Celine. Death is a mercy for men like him. I'm going to put him in a car, drive him to Teterboro, and put him on a private jet to a very remote, very strict rehabilitation facility in the Swiss Alps. He will stay there until I decide he is cured. Why? Celine asked, her voice trembling. Why do you care what happens to him? I don't give a damn about him. Nicholas replied softly, stepping around the desk until he was mere inches from her. He reached out his thumb, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was burning hot against her cold skin. But he insulted what is mine, and no one breathes in my city if they disrespect you. He turned and walked out of the glass office, leaving Celine standing alone, her heart hammering against her ribs, completely terrified by the realization that she felt safer with a Mafia boss than she ever had with her husband. 2 weeks later, the transition of power was fully integrated into the public eye. The financial press, blinded by heavily curated PR releases, lauded the strategic merger between Kensington Global and the fiercely private Obsidian Capital. Celine was plastered across the cover of the Wall Street Journal, hailed as the brilliant young CEO, steering a legacy brand into the modern era, while her husband's sudden retirement was smoothly chalked up to chronic health issues. To cement the illusion, Nicholas required her attendance at the New York Botanical Gardens annual conservatory gala, the most exclusive high society event of the spring season. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the guest suite of Nicholas's sprawling penthouse on 432 Park Avenue, Celine adjusted the neckline of her dress. It was a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, a cascading masterpiece of midnight blue silk that clung to her curves and plunged daringly in the back. Around her neck rested a necklace of flawless teardrop diamonds, a company asset Nicholas had casually tossed on her bed an hour prior. She looked like royalty. She felt like a prisoner of war. When she walked into the grand living room, the sprawling lights of Manhattan stretched out endlessly beneath the glass walls. Nicholas was waiting by the private elevator. He wore a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, stark black with a crisp white shirt and a black silk bow tie. He looked devastatingly handsome, exuding an aura of dark, unyielding power that made every breath Celine took feel shallow. His eyes swept over her, darkening with a primal heat that made her skin flush. "You look exactly as I imagined you would," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Ruling the skyline." "Let's just get this over with," Celine said sharply, though her heart was betraying her, pounding a frantic rhythm. The gala was a blur of flashing cameras, champagne flutes, and whispered gossip. Celine played her part, perfectly smiling, flawlessly shaking hands with senators, hedge fund managers, and fashion icons. But everywhere she went, Nicola was a shadow at her back. He rarely spoke, but his presence alone acted as a physical barrier. Men who used to look at Celine with predatory corporate interest now kept a respectful, fearful distance, recognizing the apex predator standing inches behind her. Around midnight, the claustrophobia of the masquerade became too much. Celine slipped away from the main ballroom, seeking refuge on a secluded, dimly lit stone terrace surrounded by blooming orchids. The cool spring air felt like salvation against her heated skin. She closed her eyes, leaning against the marble balustrade, when the heavy thud of leather shoes on stone announced his arrival. Nicholas walked onto the terrace, unbuttoning his tuxedo jacket. "You did well tonight," he said, quietly, stepping up beside her. He didn't look at her. He looked out over the sprawling Bronx cityscape. "The board is pacified. The stock is up 12%. "Are we done then?" Celine asked, exhaustion dripping from her words. "Can I go back to pretending my life isn't a hostage situation?" Nicholas finally turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The ambient light from the ballroom caught the faint scar on his eyebrow. "You think I'm holding you hostage? You think Preston was a victim of my ambition?" "I know he was," Celine snapped, her frustration boiling over. "You bought his debt to destroy him and trap me. You orchestrated this whole thing to punish me for leaving you in that apartment 5 years ago." Nicholas's jaw tightened. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out a small encrypted titanium USB drive. He held it out to her. "What is this?" Celine asked, staring at the small device. "The real reason I bought Kensington's debt." Nicholas said, his voice stripped of all its arrogant armor. It was raw bleeding. When Preston defaulted on the Camorra loan, he tried to negotiate. He didn't have the cash and he didn't want to lose his grandfather's company, so he offered them a different kind of collateral. Celine frowned, a cold sense of dread pooling in her stomach. What are you talking about? What collateral? He took out $100 million shadow life insurance policy on you, Celine, Nicola said brutally. The words hit the air like physical blows. Issued by an unregulated broker in the Cayman Islands. He collateralized your life, and he signed a secondary contract with the Palermo syndicate. Nicola stepped closer, towering over her, his eyes burning with an intense, terrifying fire. The contract stated that if he couldn't pay the $300 million he owed, the Camorra was authorized to orchestrate an accident for you. They would collect the $100 million from the insurance payout to cover part of his debt, and they would leave his company alone. The blood completely drained from Celine's face. The terrace spun around her. Her knees suddenly felt like water. She grabbed the marble balustrade to keep from collapsing. No, she whispered, her mind violently rejecting the information. No, Preston is a coward, but he wouldn't put a hit on his own wife. He sold you to a firing squad to save his stock options. Nicola snarled, the pure, unadulterated violence of the Mafia boss, finally breaking through the corporate veneer. The hit was scheduled for last Tuesday, a staged car crash on the FDR Drive. I found out through my contacts in Sicily. I had exactly 48 hours to stop it. Nicholas grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip tight, desperate, anchoring her to the ground as her world shattered. I didn't buy Kensington Global for revenge. Celine, I bought the debt at a massive premium, paying the Palermo syndicate double what Preston owed them to legally void that contract. I seized the company to strip him of his power, so he could never touch you again. I put you in my tower, surrounded by my men, because it is the only place on this earth I know you are safe. Celine stared up at him, tears finally spilling over her lashes, ruining her immaculate makeup. The man she thought was her captor had just spent $500 million to buy her life back from a syndicate executioner. Why didn't you tell me? She sobbed, the emotional dam finally breaking. She hit his chest with her fists, a weak, desperate strike. Why did you let me think you were the monster? Nicholas caught her wrists, pulling her flush against his solid chest. His breath hitched as he looked down at her crying face. Because I am a monster, Celine. The things I did to get the money to buy you out. The blood on my hands. I couldn't let you see it. I wanted you to hate me. It's easier if you hate me. Celine looked into his dark, tortured eyes. The 5 years of distance, the lies, the corporate warfare, the billionaire facades, it all burned away, leaving only the raw, bleeding truth they had abandoned in a Williamsburg apartment. She didn't hate him. God help her. She had never stopped loving him. Celine pulled her wrists free from his grip and threw her arms around his neck, pulling his face down to hers. When their lips met, it wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. It was 5 years of suppressed agony, guilt, and desperate longing exploding into an inferno. Nicholas groaned, his massive arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her entirely off the stone floor, crushing her against his body, as if he was trying to fuse their souls together. He tasted like champagne and danger. He kissed her with a consuming, terrifying possessiveness, backing her up against the stone wall of the terrace. Celine's hands tangled in his dark hair, gripping him tightly, finally accepting the truth she had run from for 5 years. Safety was an illusion, but Nicholas Rousseau was real. And as he carried her off the terrace and toward the private exits of the gala, Celine knew she was never going back to the light. She belonged in his shadows. Celine walked softly across the heated hardwood floors toward the study. Nicholas was standing behind his desk, fully dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose his forearms. Matteo, his imposing second-in-command, stood opposite him, a sleek iPad glowing in his massive hands. He bribed one of the private security contractors at Clinique La Prairie. Matteo was saying, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Wired him 50,000 from a hidden crypto wallet we didn't catch in the initial audit. He chartered a flight through VistaJet out of Geneva. He touched down at Teterboro 3 hours ago. Nicholas's face was a mask of cold fury. Where is he now? Southern District of New York, Matteo replied grimly. He walked straight into the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. He's sitting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Bradley Croft. They're drafting subpoenas as we speak, boss. Preston is claiming he was kidnapped, extorted, and that the hostile takeover was a Mafia front. He's offering them the Cayman routing numbers to prove Obsidian Capital is washing Camorra Syndicate money through Kensington Global. Celine felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped fully into the room. Both men turned to look at her. If he gives the FBI those routing numbers, Croft has enough for a RICO indictment. Celine said, her financial mind instantly overriding her shock. It won't just be an SEC investigation. They will freeze every asset Obsidian owns. They will raid the offices. Nicholas, you'll be facing 20 years in federal prison. Nicholas crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his chest and kissing the top of her head. His heartbeat was steady, terrifyingly calm. Pack a bag. Matteo has a Gulf Stream idling at Teterboro. You're flying to the estate in Lake Como until I handle this. I am not running, Celine snapped, pushing back just enough to look him in the eye. The fierce, unyielding fire that had allowed her to survive 5 years in Preston's gilded cage flared to life. I didn't let you buy my life just so you could throw yours away. Preston doesn't understand the routing numbers. He only knows the superficial layers. Celine, this isn't a boardroom proxy fight. Nicholas warned, his grip tightening on her arms. This is the federal government. They don't negotiate. Neither do I. She shot back, stepping out of his embrace and walking directly to his desk. She opened his laptop and rapidly typed in her administrative credentials, bringing up the master ledgers for Obsidian Capital. For 2 weeks, you gave me absolute control over the merger's financial integration. You trusted me with the keys to the kingdom. Now let me do my job. Matteo looked at Nicholas, raising a heavy eyebrow. Nicholas watched her, a dark, primal pride swelling in his chest. What are you going to do, Celine? I'm going to bury my husband, she said coldly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. By 9:00 a.m., the atmosphere inside the World Trade Center offices of Obsidian Capital was suffocatingly tense. Celine sat at her desk, dressed in a razor-sharp Alexander McQueen suit, her hair pulled back into a severe chignon. Beside her, Nicholas stood like a marble statue, his eyes locked on the glass elevator banks. At 9:15 a.m., the elevators pinged, and the doors slid open to reveal a swarm of men and women in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the yellow FBI logo. Leading them was AUSA Bradley Croft, a sharp-eyed prosecutor with a reputation for putting Wall Street billionaires behind bars, and trailing just behind Croft, looking disheveled, manic, and vindictive, was Preston. Preston's eyes locked onto Celine, his lips curling into a triumphant, ugly sneer. I told you, Celine, he spat across the bullpen. I told you I wouldn't let some Brooklyn street trash steal my legacy. Quiet, Mr. Kensington, Croft ordered sharply. He approached the glass office and held a signed federal warrant against the partition. Nicholas Russo. I am executing a search and seizure warrant for all physical and digital records on these premises under suspicion of racketeering, money laundering, and extortion. Nicholas didn't flinch. He didn't even uncross his arms. He simply looked at Celine. Celine stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She walked out of the glass office, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished concrete floor, and stopped 2 feet from the federal prosecutor. "Good morning, Mr. Croft," Celine said, her voice dripping with polished corporate ice. "I am Celine Kensington, CEO of this firm. You are welcome to audit our servers. In fact, I have already prepared the requested Cayman routing files your informant likely mentioned. If you turn your attention to the main conference screen, I can save your agents hours of digging." Croft narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious of the compliance, but he signaled his lead agent to plug a secure drive into the conference room terminal. The massive 80-inch screen flickered to life, displaying a complex, sprawling web of wire transfers, shell companies, and banking nodes. Preston laughed nervously. "She's handing it to you. Croft, look. The money comes from Palermo, funnels through the Caymans, and buys my debt. It's an illegal Mafia takeover." "Actually," Celine interrupted, stepping up to the screen with a laser pointer, "if you trace the metadata on those specific wire transfers, Mr. Croft, you will see they did not originate from Obsidian Capital. The Cayman's account, holding the $300 million debt, was opened 3 years ago at Credit Suisse." She clicked a button, zooming in on a specific signature document. "By Preston Kensington III." Preston froze, the manic energy drained out of him in a single terrifying second. "What? No. That's forged. I didn't open that account. The digital signature is authenticated." "Preston," Celine said coldly. She turned back to the prosecutor. "Obsidian Capital did not purchase Kensington Global's debt from the Camorra Mr. Croft. Obsidian Capital purchased the debt directly from Preston Kensington. He set up a blind trust to borrow money from Italian organized crime, funneled it through his own company to cover his gambling debts, and when he defaulted, he attempted to frame this private equity firm for the fallout." "That's a lie!" Preston screamed, his face turning purple. He lunged toward Celine, but Matteo intercepted him instantly, slamming the billionaire heir face first into the frosted glass wall and pinning him there with a single hand. "Furthermore," Celine continued, her voice echoing in the dead silent room, "you will find an encrypted file attached to that ledger. It details a $100 million shadow life insurance policy taken out on my life, bearing Preston's signature, with the Palermo syndicate, listed as the secondary beneficiary. He wasn't extorted. He hired them to execute his own wife to cover his tracks." Croft stared at the screen, his seasoned prosecutor's brain rapidly connecting the dots. The evidence was irrefutable. It was perfectly documented, deeply buried, and completely damning. He looked at Preston, who was sobbing hysterically against the glass under Matteo's crushing grip. "Celine rearranged the board while you were flying back. Preston." Nicholas finally spoke, his deep voice carrying a terrifying finality. He walked up and stood shoulder to shoulder with Celine. "You thought you were playing chess. You were barely playing checkers." Handcuffs clicked with a sharp metallic finality that echoed across the polished concrete floor of Obsidian Capital. Agents in dark windbreakers swarmed Preston, dragging his arms forcefully behind his back. He fought them with the frantic, uncoordinated thrashing of a drowning man, his bespoke suit tearing at the shoulder seam under the violent strain. "You're making a mistake!" Preston shrieked, spit flying from his lips as he twisted to look back at the glass conference room. His face was a bruised, mottled purple eyes, wide with the sudden, terrifying realization that his generational wealth could no longer shield him. "She set me up." Celine manipulated the files. "Look at the routing numbers again. Croft, she's sleeping with a mob boss." Assistant U.S. Attorney Bradley Croft didn't even blink. He merely adjusted his tie and signaled for his lead agent to pull the struggling billionaire toward the private elevator banks. "Save it for your arraignment, Mr. Kensington." Croft said, his voice a dry, bureaucratic drone. "We have your digital signature on a Cayman Islands blind trust wire transfers, verifying payments to known Palermo Syndicate associates, and a shadow life insurance policy outlining a financial motive for the attempted murder of your wife. You are facing mandatory federal minimums that will ensure you die in a supermax facility." Preston's screams faded into choked hysterical sobs as the heavy glass doors of the elevator slid shut, severing him from his empire, his freedom and his wife forever. Silence descended upon the 94th floor. It was heavy ringing loudly in the aftermath of the chaos. Croft remained standing by the glowing conference screen, his hands resting on the leather handles of his briefcase. He turned slowly, his sharp eyes moving from the cascading financial data on the 80-inch monitor to Celine and finally to Nicholas. The federal prosecutor had built his entire career dismantling corporate criminals, and he possessed the instincts of a seasoned hunter. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "It's a masterpiece," Croft murmured, shaking his head in reluctant admiration. "I have hunted syndicate money for 15 years. I know what you are, Mr. Russo. I know the foundation of this tower was poured with blood money. But this digital architect is flawless. I can't find a single fractured link to tie this to Obsidian Capital. You washed the debt clean, and you used Kensington as the soap." "Obsidian Capital operates strictly within the confines of international financial law, Mr. Croft," Nicholas replied. His voice was terrifyingly calm, devoid of any arrogance or relief. "We appreciate the FBI's diligence in rooting out corporate fraud. Have a safe ride down." Croft offered a tight, humorless smile. "Enjoy the victory, but remember the federal government has a very long memory." When the elevator pinged and took the last of the agents away, Matteo stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He gave a single respectful nod to Celine, an acknowledgement from a lethal enforcer to a woman who had just executed a hit without firing a single bullet. Matteo quietly dismissed the remaining security detail, leaving the sprawling glass-walled perimeter completely empty. Adrenaline, which had kept Celine standing rigid and articulate for the last 2 hours, finally began to evaporate. Her knees trembled slightly. She placed a hand flat against the cold surface of the conference table to steady herself, closing her eyes as she exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Nicholas stepped into her space, his large, warm hands wrapping securely around her waist. He pulled her back against his solid chest, anchoring her in the quiet aftermath. He rested his chin on the top of her head, the scent of bergamot and expensive leather, wrapping around her like a protective shield against the outside world. "You forged the metadata," Nicholas murmured, his voice vibrating through her. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement filled with dark, reverent awe. "You didn't just highlight his crimes. You actively restructured the digital signatures to ensure the money trail bypassed my shell companies entirely and pinned the syndicate debt directly on his personal trust." Celine turned in his arms, resting her hands flat against his crisp white shirt. She could feel the steady, powerful thud of his heart beneath her palms. "He committed the crimes, Nicholas," Celine whispered, looking up into his dark, storm-filled eyes. "He took the money. He ordered the hit on me to save his own skin. I simply ensured the federal government saw the narrative clearly without your name ever entering the equation. I protected my investment." A slow, wicked smile spread across Nicholas's face, changing him from a ruthless Mafia boss into the man who had loved her in a damp Williamsburg apartment 5 years ago. He lifted a hand, his knuckles gently brushing down her cheek. You protected your husband. Nicholas corrected his thumb, tracing the line of her jaw. Celine didn't flinch. 5 years ago, she had walked out into the rain because she believed pragmatism was the only way to survive. She had traded love for safety, only to realize that true safety didn't exist in gilded cages. It existed here in the shadows beside a man who would burn the world down to keep her breathing. She had wanted power, she had wanted to rule the skyline, and now she had it all. "I told you," Celine said softly, a fierce, unapologetic fire lighting up her eyes. "I don't belong on the other side of the table. I belong right next to you." Nicholas's grip tightened his dark eyes, burning with untamed possession and absolute devotion. He crushed his mouth to hers, kissing her with a fierce, consuming hunger that sealed their promise in blood corporate ink and unbreakable loyalty. The wolves would never come for them again, because together, sitting at the pinnacle of New York's skyline, they were the monsters the wolves were afraid of. Did Celine make the right choice, embracing the dark side of the empire? Or should she have walked away from the money and the mob altogether? Love, betrayal, and billion-dollar revenge. This story proves that the most dangerous predators don't lurk in dark alleys. They sit in executive boardrooms. If you loved this dramatic mafia romance and want more intense, real-life inspired storytelling, drop a comment below with what you think Celine's next move should be. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories every single week.